Elimas is the heir to the Edvon family, and today is finally the day he is going to undergo the ritual of divine blessing. But ever since he was little, whenever he saw or learned something new, he would get a strange feeling of déjà vu, as though he had experienced it somewhere before, almost like he had played a game with the exact same plot before, but no matter how much he thought about it, he could never figure out why. As he is about to begin the ritual, his father notices that he seems a little nervous, so he tells him not to worry and to simply have faith in the god of the sword. The priest then begins chanting the incantation for the ritual, and as Elimas listens to the words, the strange feeling of déjà vu suddenly becomes stronger than ever before. All at once, countless memories begin flooding into his mind, and he finally realizes that it was never déjà vu at all. In his previous life, he was an ordinary man who obsessively played an online VR game called Magic World, and this world is exactly the same as the one from that game. Upon realizing that, Elimas can hardly contain his excitement, because he knows practically everything there is to know about this world's classes, skills, monsters, dungeons, hidden quests, and powerful equipment. With all of that knowledge, he is certain that his future is guaranteed to be filled with happiness and success, and more than anything, he hopes to receive his favorite class, Heavy Knight, which was widely considered the most broken class in the entire game. It had a rough start compared to most classes, but once it was fully built, there were very few classes in the game that could hope to compete with it. Once the ritual is complete, Elimas quickly checks his status, and he is overjoyed to find that he really did receive the Heavy Knight class. Unable to contain his excitement, he immediately rushes over to tell his father the good news, but instead of congratulating him, his father looks deeply outraged and disappointed. Elimas is completely shocked by his reaction, and after thinking about it for a moment, he realizes that he accidentally mixed up his memories from the game with this world's common sense. Back in the game, Heavy Knight was one of the strongest classes if the player knew how to build it properly, but in this world, people only judge classes based on their starting abilities. Simple and powerful classes are praised from the very beginning, while technical classes that require years of training before revealing their true potential are regarded as worthless trash. Panicking, Elimas tries to lie about what class he received, but his father forcefully grabs his wrist and checks his status himself. The moment he sees the Heavy Knight class and its unimpressive starting stats, his expression turns furious. Elimas hurriedly tries to explain some of the class's strengths and future potential, but his father refuses to listen. His hand tightens around Elimas' wrist like a vice before he suddenly strikes him across the face. The impact sends Elimas crashing onto the stone floor as pain shoots through his body. His father coldly says that he wasted the divine blessing and is only relieved that the ritual wasn't held in public because it would have brought great disgrace upon the Edvon family. Before anything else can happen, footsteps suddenly echo throughout the hallway as someone enters the room. It turns out to be Malice, the daughter of the Edvon branch family, and Elimas recognizes her because when they were children, she and Elimas used to play together quite often, but as they grew older, the difference in their status caused them to drift apart, and they haven't spoken to each other in the last 5 years. Elimas immediately gets a bad feeling about this when he sees her, but there is nothing he can do but stand by and watch. Malice requests to undergo the divine blessing as well, and the priest hesitates since the ritual was only prepared for Elimas. But Elima's father interrupts him and orders him to continue. Once the ritual is complete, Malice checks her status and discovers that she received the Master Swordsman class, the most sought-after class in the kingdom. She flashes Elimas a smug grin, clearly enjoying the fact that she received a class considered far superior to his. And Elima's heart sinks because the daughter of a branch family obtaining Master Swordsman, while the main heir only received Heavy Knight, is exactly the sort of thing that would humiliate his father and make his mood worse. However, he underestimated just how quickly his father could switch gears, because instead of becoming even angrier, his father begins showering Malice with praise while completely ignoring Elimas, and before long, he proudly announces that from this onward, Malice will become his daughter and the new heir to the Edvon family. Hearing those words causes Elima's heart to sink because if Malice becomes the new heir, then where does that leave him? Malice is really living up to her name here because she continues mocking him, saying she always believed he lacked what it took to shoulder the burden of becoming the Edvon family's heir. Elimas stands there in complete disbelief as his father coldly stares at him before officially deciding to banish him from the family, and declaring that he is no longer his son. He calls him a disappointment, and orders him to leave the mansion immediately, and Elimas desperately tries one last time to earn his father's acknowledgement by promising that he will one day bring honor to the family. But his father cuts him off and tells him that this humiliation is exactly what he deserves. He warns Elimas never to use the Edvon family name again, saying that if he ever does, he will personally have him executed. Elimas stands there completely shaken as the surrounding nobles silently side with his father and leave him all alone. Before following behind Elima's father, Malice gives him one final mocking grin. Later that very day, Elimas is thrown out of the mansion with nothing more than a small pouch containing a few coins to help him survive. As he walks away through the pouring rain, Malice watches him silently from one of the mansion's windows, clearly enjoying the fact that she stole Elima's position in the family. Sometime later, Elimas arrives in Randam, a bustling city filled with adventurers hoping to make names for themselves. Elima's situation is pretty bad right now, and while staying in a small inn, he spends his time brooding over the betrayal, humiliation, and suffering his father put him through over a class. Even so, he never once loses faith in the heavy knight class because he knows better than anyone just how overpowered it can become. After calming himself down, he begins comparing the world around him with the memories of the game and quickly realizes that while the classes, skills, and monsters are exactly the same, much of the world's history, geography, and even its cities are completely different. Since he can't rely entirely on his memories anymore, he decides that he will have to carefully research this world as he travels. Before anything else though, he wants to test his abilities for himself because he'd be in real trouble if the heavy knight class wasn't the same as what he remembered in the game. But fortunately, after checking his skill tree, he is relieved to discover that none of the heavy knight's skills have changed from the game. There are 3 main ways to invest the 5 skill points you receive at the start, and it's not an exaggeration to say this decision can make or break your career. There's Path of the Heavy Armor, Defense Booster, and Beginner Swordsmanship. Path of the Heavy Armor is considered the weakest of all the heavy knight's skills in this world because of how limited its applications are. Defense Booster doesn't do much other than grant the user increased defense stats, and Beginner Swordsmanship just lets you use sword skills early on. Most people who got the heavy knight class would choose Beginner Swordsmanship, and sure, it has its pros, but having played through this class before, Elimas knows exactly which skill tree grants the best rewards in the long run. He knows that almost nobody ever sticks with Path of the Heavy Armor long enough to discover its true value, and that is exactly why so few people realize how absurdly powerful it eventually becomes. So without hesitation, he invests all of his available skill points into Oath of the Armor. As he does this, he can immediately feel the effects of the skill tree on his body, and he also gains the skill Rampart Reflection, which is exactly what he needs right now. He then purchases the equipment he will need to begin his journey as a heavy knight, and sets out into the forest to start his first battle. As he walks through the peaceful scenery, the beautiful surroundings manage to take his mind off everything that happened with his father, if only for a little while, but eventually, he comes across a frog monster hiding in the rana. The frog leaps at him, so he activates Rampart Reflection, and as the frog slams into his shield, it is blown back and killed on the spot. Rampart Reflection allows Elimas to deal damage equal to his defense to all targets that strike his shield, and although it doesn't work on all types of enemies, against a weak opponent, it's an instant kill. He collects the magic stone from the frog's corpse, and even though it's not worth much, he decides to hold onto it in case he needs it later. Just as the battle was over, he suddenly hears someone screaming for help somewhere deeper in the forest, so without wasting any time, he rushes toward the sound and finds an adventurer surrounded by monsters. The man is shocked that Elimas would actually come to help and immediately asks if he can really handle that many monsters, wondering whether he is some famous adventurer despite how young he looks. Elimas quickly denies that and casually reveals that this is actually his very first time leveling up. The adventurer immediately blurts out that he's hopeless, and says there is no way a complete beginner could defeat so many monsters. However, Elimas isn't bothered by his warning, because he already understands exactly how these starter monsters behave. Rampart Reflection isn't an unbeatable skill, but as long as the user's defense is high enough, it becomes incredibly powerful. So much so that even against a horde of monsters like this, Elimas has nothing to fear. The adventurer desperately tells Elimas to run away, but Elimas calmly activates Rampart Reflection once again, and as the frogs slam into his shield one after another, the adventurer is left shocked as they all die one after another. He has never seen someone defeat this many Rana all by themselves, so he asks Elimas who he is. Elimas is about to give him his full name, but then he remembers what his father said about never using the family name again, and quite frankly, he doesn't want to have anything to do with that family either. So he simply introduces himself as Elimas, the Heavy Knight.